Okay, so here's what I remember. It was summer of 1995. You had just graduated high school, and I was going to start my senior year the next year. And we got cast in a play, a summer play, Annie Get Your Gun.
Right.
And I remember it was like either the dress rehearsal or maybe it was even a performance, but we were backstage. We were in our costumes. You were playing Sitting Bull, the Indian character, and I was Buffalo Bill, the cowboy. And so we were walking around backstage, all in our, our dress, our costumes. And you were in a really bad mood. You were really depressed, and I just could not get any information out of you why you were so upset. So I was going, man, something happened, and I was like, is he mad at me? Like, what's going on? And I was kind of getting worried. And finally, you revealed that you had just watched a movie that just put you in a really bad mood. And I was like, well, what movie is that? Like, what could possibly make you feel this depressed? And when you said A Clockwork Orange, I'd never heard of it. I was kind of like, that's a weird title for a movie. I was like, okay. I was
Yeah.
like, and you kind of briefly told me what it was about. And you were like, you were just adamant, do not watch this movie. And so I was like, okay, like I have no reason to watch that. Like I didn't really even know what it was. And so I was like, okay, fine, I won't watch it. And then seriously, for like I think almost a decade at least, I just did not watch the movie because I kept hearing your voice in the back of my head saying, don't watch this movie. And so when I would see it on the shelves in Blockbuster or Hollywood, I would, kind of look at it and go, oh, this is that one Darren says not to watch. And I'd look at the cover and be like, that triangle with, Alice kind of like holding the dagger and the little eyeball on his wrist and the little statue beneath him. And I was like, this is a weird cover too. So I look at the back, read what it's about, and be like, all right. Like it didn't seem to appeal to me at all. So I was like, I mean, Darren says don't watch it, so I'm not gonna watch it. And I'd put it away. And then finally, like, I think it was I don't know what happened, but eventually someone started talking about it or something. So I was like, you know what? Maybe I should just kind of see what it's all about. Like, what's the big deal? Like, will I get that depressed watching it? I don't know. So I finally watched it one day, and I was kind of like, well, that was stupid. Like, I just was thinking, like, what a dumb movie that was. And then I remember, like, I told my parents that I watched it. My dad's like, oh, I saw that movie. And I was like, "You saw that movie?" It was like, "It's like, yeah, I saw it at the drive-in with your mom. We on a date. We went and saw Clockwork Orange." And I was like,
Wow.
"Really?" I was so shocked. But anyway, I remember like thinking I wasn't that impressed by it. In fact, I remember thinking it was kind of stupid. And some of the things they did were like, "Why is this considered such a great movie?" And I don't understand. I just didn't understand it. And I think I had a couple more viewings like later on. I think I watched it like last year sometime just because I was like, it was on TV or something. It was on Max or something. And so I watched it, and my wife walked in the room and she goes, "What is this garbage you're watching?" So
Yeah.
I was like, "Oh, it's a Clockwork Orange." And she was like, "Oh, I've heard of that." And so she kind of watched bits and pieces of it with me, but she's like, "This is trash." And they get up and leave. And I was like, huh. So I was still kind of on the fence about it, and I didn't watch it again until we talked about doing this episode. And this third time, I will say I liked it a little bit more, but I still don't like this movie. But I still liked it more than I did the first couple times I watched it.
Hmm.
But anyway, that wasn't my first experience, but basically my first experience was your experience because you told me and you were so adamant, don't watch the movie. So I want to hear, like, because you never really told me more details about what your experience was. Like, what happened when you first saw it? Where were you? Who you were with? Tell me about it.
Well, we all know Stanley Kubrick, right? It's one of those names that carries so much weight. And we've talked about it many times before, when we start trying to be a movie buff and trying to learn all the things, you can sound smart when you talk about the cinema, that kind of thing. Stanley Kubrick is one of the heavy hitters. And so obviously, I watched 2001, which I was blown away by. Doctor Strangelove, I thought was one of the funniest things I've ever seen. The Shining is obviously very big. So when I again dove into the Kubrick filmography during the 90s, Clockwork Orange is, I think, it was one of the first that I ventured into. And it's funny your dad saying that he went to on a date. This is not a date movie. This is like something that you definitely would not. So that's an interesting kind of, it's nice that they were able to get over, whatever happened to the movie and marry each other, because that's, anyway, really interesting. But so I get it's part of the counterculture. During the 60s and 70s, you had movies like Bonnie and Clyde, you had Easy Rider, that kind of were anti-establishment, that took this whole thing and they turned it on their head. Like they took like unlikable characters, they took like violent acts, sexual acts, and they showed them on screen. So they kind of bucked all these trends that had been established. And so Clockwork Orange slots into that. But I wasn't prepared for it. You hear it's made in 1971, and so you're like, oh, well, there's going to be a barrier. There's only so much they can do. And this movie just, it went so much further than I ever thought possible for a movie. And I've seen slasher movies. RoboCop is one of my favorite movies, but just I don't know. We'll getting into the movie in a little bit. Just the way that it's shot, so matter of factly, it just disturbed me to the point where I don't know. I maybe I got the point like halfway through, and then I was like, I'm done. But I kept watching it all the way to the end, to the point where I was like, well, this is a complete waste of my time. And I just felt like so gross and so disturbed by everything they were doing. And again, that's the point. But when I was watching it that first time, I was like, I just wasn't prepared for it. And so I shut my mind off, and it really depressed me because I was like, I could have turned that off at any time, but I didn't. I watched the whole thing, and is it worth it? And so all that stuff was just going through my head. Again, I watched it by myself. I didn't watch it with anybody. It was a movie
Okay.
that I rented. I was old enough apparently to rent A Clockwork Orange, which initially got an X rating from the MPAA when it was first released. I was able to rent that from Blockbuster, so it shows a lot about their security. But yeah, it was just a depressing experience. Maybe I wasn't ready for it. Maybe it was too extreme. And again, watching it actually, I think I've seen it maybe one more time, and we talked about it last episode. I swore I would never watch it again, and we'll talk about why in a little bit. But going over the history of it and everything like that, I have a different kind of approach to the movie. It's more fun to talk about than it is to watch, because it's not anybody's idea of a good time. Like if you say that this is a fun movie to sit through, I'm like, what is wrong with you? Like, I need to distance myself from you. It's that kind of movie, right?
What's funny is I told a coworker that I had read the book, and he was like, "Oh, that was my friend's favorite movie." And I was like,
Yeah.
"It was your friend's favorite movie?"
Okay.
Like,
Well,
all right.
it reminds me of our Fight Club episode where I think we mentioned that David Fincher, whenever I think a girl came up to him and said, "My Fight Club is my boyfriend's favorite movie," and he was like, break up with that man. It's like it shouldn't be anybody's favorite movie. It's
Yeah.
again, it like Fight Club, it talks about things that are kind of breaking taboos, and I get it, but it's just a matter of I guess druthers. I guess it depends on who you are and how it's going to affect you.
Well, I know it's not your favorite movie, and I know it's not my favorite movie. So, but let's still talk about it anyway. Okay, so the book.
Hmm.
Anthony Burgess wrote
Mm-hmm.
A Clockwork Orange, and I have some strong feelings about it. I know you said you didn't want to watch the movie, but you were going to read the book for the episode, and so
Yeah.
I did the same thing. And I had to say, like, I was kind of blown away. I was like immediately intrigued by it, and it grabbed my attention and it held it. And I would listen to the audio version of the book with Tom Hollander, I think is the guy who did the
Yep.
narration.
Yep.
And he was fantastic narrator, and he did a great job. And I was able to kind of listen to it to him from work. I have like a half-hour drive each day to him from
Exactly.
work, and so I can kind of get through it pretty quick. And I gotta say, man, I was really impressed. Like I fell in love with the language, the NADSAT language that he created, and I was really impressed at first. And then I started researching, like, what is this language? It sounds kind of like Russian or something. And so I looked it up, and I was like, oh, it is Russian. I was
Yeah.
like, he's just taking these Russian words, and the characters are either like mispronouncing them or sometimes it's like repurposed. But it's basically the author was learning Russian during that time of when he was writing the book, and so he put this into as part of their language. I think Nadsat actually means like teen or something, and so these teenagers are speaking this Nadsat language, and like I say, I fell in love with it, and but that kind of stuff appeals to me. When I was younger, I used to talk backwards with a friend of ours, and we would like say words backwards and had this like secret language we could talk to each other, and no one knew what we were saying, and so I was kind of like that appealed to me right away, and anyway, it was funny. I looked up some of the words and what they mean and everything, and I didn't mean to, but I accidentally downloaded the entire glossary. So
Okay.
I was able to, like, if I didn't know something, I'd pause it, look at the glossary. Okay, that's what that means. And then and I'd like at that point you learn what things mean, and they use the same words often enough that you become familiar with it
Mm.
and it starts to make sense. And you start to, hear words like, slushy for seeing or for hearing something, and vidi for seeing something, and lomtic like a little bit or a slice, or malchick like a boy, or vec it means like a man, or like a malchek, or like a what's that, like a or a malavec, what's that called? Like a
Halibut?
fellow, like I
Yeah,
don't
yeah.
know. And there's a bunch of different words. The one thing that is pretty similar to Russian was the word slovo, which is the in Russian is slova, I think, or they pronounce it slova, but it's slovo in the book, and that just means word.
Mm.
So it's like, okay, so he just took the word that means word in Russian and made it mean word in Nadsat. But
Right.
anyway, so like I say, I fell in love with the language, and it was so fun to listen to because there was this rhythm, there was this cadence to it, and being a drummer, like I'm always kind of drawn to things like that. And so when I hear something that has that kind of like rhythm or that beat or that pace to it, it's like, okay, that gets my attention right away. And so, um, and here's, I will say this, like, yes, the movie is violent, but the book is, I think, even more violent.
Hmm.
But because the language, it kind of softens the blow. And because of the cadence and the rhythm, like I don't mind hearing about all the things that are happening because I'm still enjoying this cadence and this rhythm that's being kind of like fed to me. And so I really liked it. And I know you have some thoughts in the book, and we'll talk about more things about it. But did you read the book first or watch the movie first? Like
Watched the
what?
movie first. I didn't read
Okay.
the book or listen to absorb the book until this week, really.
Okay. So did you read a physical copy of it like soon after, like after you saw the movie?
No, I never have. I
Oh,
never touched because I didn't
oh,
want to have anything to do with the Clockwork
oh,
Orange.
okay.
I wanted to get as far away from it as I possibly could. It
But you
took
told me
two
you
decades.
read the book previously though.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, okay.
So just I read. So I've read a copy of it. I don't remember when, but I didn't remember enough. Again, I couldn't separate myself from it. So this time, I like you. I listened to the audio book, and Hollander, man, the way he, I don't know. I think you talked about the cadence and everything. A lot of it has to do with his. I want to call it a performance. The way that he
Yeah.
read the book. I love Tom Hollander, the Pirates movies, or Mission Impossible, or even Bohemian Rhapsody. I loved having him in there.
Yeah.
That kind of. I just
Yeah.
like his face. I like his voice. But the way that he did the cadences, the way that he would change his voice by character and things like that, I think that has a lot to do with it and why it's entertaining as a book. It's interesting because, yeah, the Nadsat language, Burgess wrote that as a remove. So when you hear this language, it's not realistic. Nobody talks like this. I mean, he wrote this in the 60s, and so this is the feature in the 80s, which is funny, reading it like 40 years after it's supposed to take place. So his idea was he didn't want to just have current slang because that would date it. So he wanted to, since he was a linguist, he wanted to create a new language that would make it kind of timeless. And I think that absolutely works for it. And it is very entertaining to the point where when they're raping people and they're killing people, you're right, you're still entertained, not just by Hollander, but by the language of it. And by he Alex sounds in your head like a very charismatic, easy to like guy, even though he's prone to these bursts of violence or these nights of violence,
Yeah.
right? So there's that remove. I thought it was interesting too, because the difference between a book and a movie is in a book you can imagine whatever you want. Your brain
Right.
doesn't have to go there. So a lot of the stuff, I admit, I was like, oh, how far did they rape the wife? Did they brutalize and rape Alex when the cops find him in the end? Like, I didn't make that clear to myself because I didn't want to think about that. I just think that's an interesting difference between a book and a movie, because when you watch a movie, it shows you anything. It basically leaves hardly anything to the imagination. So that disturbs you a lot more. So there's a remove in the book there's another level, another layer of removal in the book that's not there in the movie, and that's why I think the book goes down a little easier.
Hmm.
But like I was telling you off air, I still had to take, even though Hollander is entertaining, I still had to take large breaks from listening to the book because it would just affect my brain. I'd be walking around, I'd see people looking at me funny, or I'd imagine looking at me funny. I would like walk downstairs or go down an alley or into a door and think, am I going to be attacked? That kind of thing. It affected my brain so much. I was like, I got to stop thinking about this. And so I'd go and I'd listen to animated like Disney music, to
Yeah.
get my mind off it. But at the end of it, I wanted to distance myself from the movie, but the book, the more I think about it, I'm like, yeah, I like the point of the book better because there's that removal. And again, some of the book is more extreme than the movie. And
Hmm.
then some of the movie is more extreme than the book, like we talked about. Like,
Yeah.
especially when Alex takes those two girls from the record store, like in the movie when they speed up or whatever, and then they show that whole scene with them, the threesome. In the book, those two girls, first of all, Alex is 15.
Yeah.
He's
Yeah. In the book,
15
he's
years
15,
old.
right?
Right. And so it's like every time you hear that, you're like, whoa, he's doing all these things and he's 15 years old. The way that he talks and he's so charismatic. I wasn't that charismatic when I was 15. But those two girls in the book are 10 years old.
Yeah.
And it talks about him drugging them and then doing things to them to the point where he says when they come out of it, they realize what had happened and they start threatening him. And he's so cool and removed from it all that he brushes it off and goes to sleep. And I think because they're 10, they're not going to do anything, which is an awful kind of rape culture. I hate to keep using that word again, but like that's what
Yeah.
culture is, right? It's like
Yeah.
you're not going to say anything because you're going to be victim blamed. And so again, I think the movie softens that because there's no way you're going to watch a movie about a 15-year-old kid imagining this stuff and then
Yeah.
watch him attack two 10-year-old girls. You're not going to be able to
Yeah.
identify or empathize with that character. So I don't know. I just thought that because I could remove myself from what was happening in the book, it went down a lot easier. And I appreciate the book and what it had to say more than I appreciate the movie.
Yeah. And I'm not excusing any of the things that are in the book.
Oh,
Like,
no.
I'm not
Yeah.
saying that I, can condone any of that stuff. I'm just saying like it's more fun to listen to as a book, as an audiobook than it is a movie.
Right.
Some
Well,
reasons,
Alex in the book, when he's telling you like it's the coolest thing in the world. He doesn't
yeah,
expect you to be horrified by it.
yeah.
That's the draw of it.
Yeah, yeah. Um, well, the book was banned in the US.
Yeah.
One neat side note is that when it was being published in the United States, the publisher in New York, he refused to put the 21st chapter in the book.
Yeah.
And
Interesting.
the 21st chapter, there's some redeeming quality. It's kind of a redeeming chapter a little bit. And so the way Anthony Burgess explained it is, that chapter's there because my book had three parts and I needed my character to have some sort of, like an arc and a finishing point. And in the movie, or in the US version of the book, when they cut the last chapter, then it's no longer a novel. Now it's just a fable.
Hmm.
It's the character doesn't redeem himself.
Interesting. Yep.
And I understand why they think that was edgy or cool to keep that last chapter out, but that last chapter, it kind of resolves everything. Like you learn about um, Georgie being killed at one of their, invasions when Alex is in prison. You learn about Dim becoming a cop, and then you learn at the end that Pete, ends up getting married and kind of like does a whole 180 reversal and like changes his life around and that for me was satisfying because you follow these characters around. And so when you finally get to know what happens to all of them, it's like, well, that's kind of what I wanted, In the movie, you don't get that. Yeah, anyway, so they banned the book, and there's actually a bookseller in Orem, Utah, Darren, where we grew up, who
Yep.
tried to sell the book and was arrested. I don't think that the charges stuck or anything, but
No.
he was forced to move out into a new city or something like that. But I thought it was interesting that where we grew up is the bookseller who sold the book.
Well, there's a lot of history of books. Catcher in the Rye is another one. Harry Potter, of all things, is another one. Like some anarchy books, things like that. That maybe are too much for little kid brains when they're forming their opinions and things like that. So you want to pull it from there. And so there's a long history. I think in 1973, I think is when the Orem, Utah incident happened. 1976 they banned it. 1977 they banned it. 82 they banned it. I think for the movie, Britain banned it after it debuted, and they didn't let it play again in theaters until the 2000s, and so they
Hmm.
didn't put it by 30 years. But like there's a whole history of that stuff with censorship and things like that, which is understand. I don't Harry Potter I don't really get because it's a fun fantasy. I don't think it teaches you witchcraft. You don't walk around thinking you're going to do witchcraft stuff. But yeah, it's hard because like we mentioned with Fight Club, the book or the movie, the book and the movie of Fight Club is teaching you that this stuff is bad. Like, don't do this. It's like a satirical kind of anti, you know, book. You know what I mean? And so, but some people don't get that, and they'll read
Yeah,
Fight Club. They'll read A Clockwork Orange or watch A Clockwork Orange, and they'll think, "Oh, this is cool. This is what I should be doing, so I can be like appreciated, and then I can make a dent." And so I get that. And even Kubrick
pulled the movie from theaters because there were some copycat killings that were happening where they were citing the movie as an inspiration. He's like, that's not what I wanted. Like I would put this movie out there to teach people, don't do this. And this is terrible. It's a government, kind of screed, that kind of thing. And so, yeah, that whole issue. Talking about that last chapter, it does say that Kubrick hadn't even read it because they did cut it, and I don't think they released it again until the 2000s, restored that last chapter.
Hmm.
So Kubrick wasn't even aware that there was another chapter to it, so he didn't even write the screenplay. And then when he read it, he's like, well, that's kind of pointless. Like, I don't want to have that in my movie. It doesn't. It's the critics of that chapter, one of the reasons they pulled it is because it didn't seem believable with the rest of the book. But I don't know what you thought. I thought it was interesting that, again, Alex is such a cool dude that he's like, all the raping and pillaging and murder that I did. It's like, that's nothing. Like, don't worry about that. That's no big deal, right? I mean, I'm better now. I like that he meets Pete, and then he's like, well, I'm missing something. Like he has new friends, and he's like, well, the violence isn't working for me. What do I do? And then he meets Pete with his new wife, and he's like, oh, maybe I should be monogamous. Maybe I
Yeah.
should get married, settle down, and have kids. But then he thinks, but what if I have kids and they become just as sociopathic as me? And it's just, it's
Yeah.
interesting.
Well,
It gives you more to think about or chew on.
yeah, I just like seeing the character growth. I like seeing that he was
Yeah.
thinking about it, that there was maybe a possibility that he could, change. That to me was like, okay,
Now that he's
'cause-
18.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, so as far as the book, anything else you want to say about the book? Or
No, that's basically it. I mean, again, if anybody wants to listen to the Hollander audiobook, it's great. It's entertaining. And just like you said, Johnny, it's like, that's the point. And we're going to say that a lot. That's the point. It just
yeah,
depends on
and I
how
like
well
that they
you
make
absorb
that
that.
point in the book, and they make it in the movie too. But the book they talk about it a lot. They actually you say the title of the book a lot. They see A Clockwork Orange, and you learn, Orange is man, and
Mhm.
being a clockwork orange is like a mechanical man or like someone who has
Yeah.
no choice.
Yeah.
So you take away a man's choice, and he ceases to be a man. So
Yeah.
I like that point. I like that message is getting across. So and you get that in the movie, but it's not to the same extent as you do in the book.
It's more lyrical and it makes, I don't know. It's not as, I want to say in your face. It's not as in your face as the book
Yeah,
is. The book makes more of a, which again, it sunk in more when I was reading the book. And I do appreciate that last chapter, even though you didn't necessarily need it. I just thought it was again, it's like a dystopian sci-fi. You don't really think about that. It takes place in
yeah,
the future, that kind of thing. But it leaves you with something, like I said, to think about.
yeah,
Which I guess the movie does. If you leave that last chapter, it still kind of has the same effect. But I agree with
yeah,
you. I need, and we kind of touched on this in the Goodfellas episode. It's like my only problem with that movie is like Henry Hill seems to learn the same lesson over and over and over again, and it never sinks in. And
yeah,
so it's kind of like, oh, I get that it's life, but it's like, oh, well, maybe I need a little, like, after the 17th scene of somebody not learning something, it's like, okay,
yeah.
what can we
Yeah,
cut? But
like I said before, the language and the NADSAT language, that's the best thing about it.
yeah.
And I think Kubrick did a disservice by limiting, the use of the language. We'll talk about that with the movie. But Darin, I sent you a text, and I liked the language so much. And we were getting ready to talk about the recording this episode.
Mhm.
I sent you a text to let you know that I read the book. So I want you to read what I wrote.
Okay. And again, I think my response was, oh,
You were like, "Yipes!"
yipes. Yeah. Okay. So let me see. I'm not gonna be able to do the Cockney accent. I was like, I'm not just a lomtic, my brother. This malenki vec, this tol chalking malchick, slushied every gloopy slovo, all horror show and proper. No need to video the skinny now, but I might, oh my brother, video it with me glazzies, this notchy all by me oddy knocky, while munching eggy wags, burnt touch with jammy wham, hot milky chai, and all that cow.
Yeah.
Which what I loved, and I think they've said this in some of the reviews of the book, is it's just like you said. At first, you're like, "What?" It's kind of like Shakespeare, not
Yeah.
so much the content. Shakespeare, you're not used to the language, you're not used to the iambic pentameter, but once the play goes on, you get it. It slowly
Yeah.
sinks in. I think with this, it's more interesting because it sinks in like almost immediately. Like, what does vidi mean? Like all these things, but
Yeah.
it does. After a while, you write, it's, oh, that's what this means. So by the end, you're like, oh, I know what this means. I don't even have to
Yeah.
look for it. So
Yeah.
it's
You
great.
basically learn the language. And so
Yeah,
that's pretty cool.
right.
Okay. So let's go into the movie. Um,
Ugh.
no, we have some feelings about it.
Yeah.
Let me just say what I think first. Like I mentioned, I think I said I didn't like it. I thought it was terrible the first time I saw it. Second time, I was still kind of like, the third time, I was like, okay, you know what? I can see why people like this. Like, I get it. Like there are some pretty cool things that are done. There's pretty cool moments. There's things here and there that you're like, okay, you know, I get that. But there's also a lot of stuff that I think is ridiculous. And you think, okay, that's just,
Mhm.
it's too much. It doesn't work. Like there's a lot of things that, and I know people think Kubrick is one of the greatest filmmakers of all time. I'm not saying he's bad. I think he's done some really good work. I just think he's overrated. And I think there's a lot of stuff that he does in this movie, particularly, that is silly and just kind of like, and I'll say it like this. I I like Kubrick, okay, and I think he's done some good stuff. But I, as I was reading the book, I kept envisioning what Terry Gilliam would do with this movie, you know,
Mm.
or someone like that, someone who was like has this like quirky vision, not just like a Stanley Kubrick vision where everything's kind of flat and static and these long shots that just don't move and these wide angles of like these rooms and like nothing happens and you get like 10 minutes of nothing and you're bored out of your mind. Like I get that a lot from Kubrick, even though I know it's artistic what he's doing. I know he's putting these, you know, uh, hidden messages in his movies, and I get all that. I'm not blind to it. I know it's
Yeah.
there. But after 2 or 3 minutes of the same shot, not moving or doing anything, I start to get bored. And I know we had a guest on. I think it was it Lindsay who came on, and she said the
For
worst thing a
Dusk Till
movie
Dawn.
can do is bore me.
Yeah. Yep.
And that's how I feel about Kubrick movies. There's only a few that I watch that I don't get bored. And at the end we'll talk about those. But this one bores the crap out of me. Like, I just get so bored. Um, anyway, so even though he's a good director and he's very visionary, I'll give him credit for that. I don't think this is a good movie. Even though I can see why people like it.
It's again, what I don't know if I mentioned this during our intro. This was the movie, and around that time that watched it the first time, this was my least favorite movie of all time. It just made me feel so gross. Even though, and I don't think I got the point. Maybe that was it. Maybe I was so grossed out by it that I didn't understand it, right? But I don't think I would call this the worst movie ever made. Still, I get what it's doing, and watching some documentaries on the movie, reading the book, there's some really cool stuff that happens in this movie. So I don't want to say it's the worst thing. When I told you not to watch it, you and I have similar ideas about what movies are, right? I knew that if you watched it, you would not be happy about it. You would feel just the way I felt. And so I was like, don't watch it. I know what it's going to make you feel like, and I don't want you to feel that way. Watch happy stuff, right? Go watch some cartoons. Don't watch this movie. But, you know, I don't like the way that the movies become part of our culture. I don't like the way that Bart Simpson dresses up as one of the Droogs, right? I don't like that. I think Blur had a video, The Ultimate or something like that, where they had the band dressed up as Droogs, things like that. And it reminds me of like during Madagascar, of all things, the animated cartoon, when it shows the lion, I don't even care about his name, but he's resting in a sea of like steaks, and it's clearly an American Beauty reference. And I remember watching Madagascar going, that is disgusting. Like, do you understand what the image in American Beauty is saying? It's a nude girl lying on a field of roses, and it's this guy that wants to have sex with an underage girl, and you're repurposing that for a kid's cartoon. I'm like,
Yeah.
what? How dare you? What is this?
Yeah.
It's not funny. And so I don't like the way that it's absorbed into culture that way, because having Bart Simpson, like we've talked about Simpsons before, had conversations on Simpsons before, but it's like that's a satire. But still, I'm like, there it goes too far. Don't have Bart Simpson dress up as a droog. You know what I mean? So I don't like that. And but again, this is a movie. It's so much more fun to talk about. I get the point of it, and I love the point. My question, reading the book and watching documentaries this time, is I get that it's about free will. I get it's about once you take away a man's choice, he ceases to be a man, right? He's organic on the outside, but he's mechanical on the inside. I just wonder why you had to tell a story that goes to these extremes to tell that same story.
Yeah.
So what this movie did is it taught me that I can turn off a movie. And we've talked about Requiem for a Dream before. That Requiem for a Dream, I was feeling the same, and I got it. Like 45 minutes in, I'm like, yeah, drugs are bad. I don't need to watch this anymore. So I turned it off, and I famously never gone back and watched it, which again, nothing against the movie. I just got it, right?
Mhm.
But the other thing too is even though the rape scene in this, where they go to F. Fitzgerald, his house, that whole scene,
Alexandra.
F. Alexander. Yeah, maybe I keep thinking F. Scott Fitzgerald, but F. Alexander. They go to his house or whatever, and I don't know. The other thing too when I think about it is I will not watch a movie if there's a rape scene in it anymore. Like I think you know some people. I know a couple of people that have gone through that experience, and it's such a traumatic experience that when you watch, and sorry if this is getting a little bit too, what is the word that they use? Like sensitivity warning, stuff like that. Like maybe turned off or skip to this time code, that kind of thing. But rape scenes, by definition, are exploitative, right? No matter what you do, no matter how you shoot it, a rape scene is going to titillate somebody when they're watching it. A rape scene is going to appeal to somebody in a way that makes them think, oh, I should go out and do that. Kind of the same way that people watch A Clockwork Orange and go out and kind of do these things. And I just think that's really irresponsible to do, because when you titillate somebody and it's to the wrong reasons, and the way that it's so dehumanizing in real life, what it takes away from a person when you do that, like it's so traumatic, it's so awful. And like we talked about, the whole rape culture surrounding it is so awful. It's like I don't want to give my time to a movie like that. Like if you're gonna to stoop to that level, it's like I don't want to watch you anymore, because I don't think you need to show me that. I don't think you need to kind of tempt fate by making somebody excited by a scene like that. You know what I mean? It's weird. It's just taught me a few things about the way that I watch movies, and in that way, I guess Clockwork Orange is an important movie.
Yeah.
I don't know what I want to talk
No,
about
you
Kubrick, but
were
what do you think about that?
well, you were always one to sit to the end credits were finished. Like you would stay in the theater and watch everything to the very last
Yeah.
second, and then you'd up and leave. And so I understand your thought process of like, I don't want to watch everything and watch every frame, every second of the movie. But I never had a problem turning movies off.
Okay, good.
So, but it's good that you have that now, that you can do that,
Yeah.
because you don't need to watch everything all the time. You know what I mean? Like you can say no. And I said no for 10 years on a
Yeah.
so,
Well, again, I'm not trying to glory post or anything. It's just I know enough of that experience that I don't want to experience a rape scene in a movie anymore. You know what I
yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
It's just it's just irresponsible. But the
Yeah.
thing with Kubrick, like we talked about, this is a counterculture movie. It's like Bonnie and Clyde, Easy Rider. Clockwork Orange was a big hit because people wanted to see this, and they hadn't seen some of the images in it before. And like you, I get it. Like there are people that call this movie a masterpiece, and I personally wouldn't call it that, because like you, like the Patrick McGee character, or McGee, I think the acting that he does is way too over the top. Like I'm not sure if you're trying to be funny. You know, the way that he's constantly shaking or drooling or things like. And I get that he's been affected, but it's to the point where it's like, is this a cartoon?
That's one thing I was going to mention
Yeah,
was that scene where he's doing that. Yeah.
yeah. And I get the scenes where it's the Droogs fighting the other members in there. What I liked, we didn't mention this when we talked about the book. I like that there's all this horrid stuff going on, but also these Alex will sit down and he'll listen to Beethoven like it's orgasmic.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
that's a point that the book makes. It's like he's so cultured. Like cultured people listen to Beethoven, cultured people listen to Bach, cultured people listen to classical music. Why is this guy being soothed by this? But it's exciting him in a different way. I guess the way that rock and roll kind of excites people or makes people go out and do terrible things is kind of that same. But it's this interesting classical music stirring these people to do that kind of stuff.
Yeah. It's a nice contrast. It's actually, I think it makes the character endearing in some way.
But it takes that free will away from him too when they introduce him
Yeah.
during the Ludovico thing, where they introduce Beethoven. It kind of sours him on that too. It's like, oh, you're
Yeah.
taking away the culture
Yeah.
part of him too. Like, what is left of the man?
Yeah. Well, let me run down a few things that I hate about the movie.
Okay.
The first thing is, well, I don't hate this opening shot. I think it's pretty impressive, actually. I think it's amazing that Malcolm McDowell can sit for 2.5 minutes and not blink. Like
Yeah.
he doesn't blink that entire opening shot.
Mm.
That's impressive, because I was like, I'm gonna try that. So I sat there and tried not to blink. That's like maybe 30 seconds time. My eyes got watery and I had to
Yeah.
blink. But that's impressive. But the very next shot, when they're beating up the old man in the alleyway, is it's the same kind of thing. It starts tight and it zooms out. It starts tight and it pulls back, whatever. And I go, okay, can you do something else? You know what I mean? And then like the same thing happens again. The shot might be composed right, and it might be a well orchestrated shot, but it's the same thing. And then the same thing happens several other times where they start tight and then just pull out. And I go, what? I mean, are you making the same point over and over again? What's going on here?
Yeah.
I mean, you want to mention about the cinematography. What do you think about that? Was that on purpose, or was that just
Well, I don't know.
And
You're right about Kubrick kind of repeating stuff and making the same point again and again. It's interesting going through like the history of his cinematographers, because if you're looking at someone like Spielberg, who uses like Janusz Kaminski like over and over and over and over and over again, to the point it's like, well, use somebody else, for crying out loud. I have a list of, he used Lucian Ballard for The Killing in 1956. He used George Krauss for The Paths of Glory in 1957, Russell Meddy for Spartacus, Oswald Morris for Lolita, Gilbert Taylor, who did the cinematography for Star Wars, which you talked about last time. He worked on Doctor Strangelove. Jeffrey Unsworth, who did the cinematography for the movie we might be talking about next time, he did for 2001. And then John Alcott, during the making of 2001, it was such an arduous process, an arduous film, that Unsworth left, and this guy John Alcott kind of took over, and then Kubrick worked with Alcott on this and the next on Barry Lyndon, that kind of thing. But the cinematography, there's, I think my problem with the movie and why it's so disturbing is that it's so matter of fact. A lot of the time it's shot in the same 70s kind of quick zoom in, like cheesy stuff that you can tell it dates it from the 70s, that kind of thing. But there are still some very striking shots. Like you talked about, when they beat up the homeless guy under the bridge, and the way that the shadows stretch across is great. During the, like I said, the fight scene with the other, it's so over the top during the Beethoven stuff that it's like pratfalls and they're jumping through windows, that kind of thing. That stuff is funny. I don't mind that, because I get the point that it's doing, like in those heightened situations. The part where he's beating up his droogs and it slows down when he knocks him into the water, that kind of thing. There's this remove in the movie that when you slow it down and make it balletic, you're taking away the violence, you're appreciating the violence instead of it letting it shock you, I guess. And the scene where Alex is with the two girls and it speeds up, and it's like, what, a 20-minute scene that's sped up and it goes by in like 30 seconds, something like that. That's for a comedic effect. They use the William Tell overture for
yes,
that,
yeah,
right? So again, it's all to a point. And then when I talked about how I watched documentaries on the movie and I see how it was made and what they were doing, there's some impressive things. There are three parts, like you said. And for that first part with the ultra violence, I think Kubrick and Alcott, they employed like a bright color presentation with high key lighting, like zooms. And so it's very extreme. It's kind of to tie in with, what we're seeing on the screen. When it cuts to the, when he's in prison, it's like flat colors when he's being
hmm
deprogrammed, that kind of thing. There's flat tones, long takes, subtle camera moves. And then when it goes back to the third act, when he goes back to his life after prison, it's kind of shot with the same kind of excitedness, I think, but it has more of I don't know, it's kind of gray and it's kind of desaturated. And so it takes the fun and the color out of that, because Alex is being brutalized by the people that he brutalized, right?
Okay,
So
I thought it was a little more colorful in that third act. Actually, I thought it was a little,
interesting.
yeah, a little
Okay.
brighter. Like the reds kind of popped more.
Okay. That's
Maybe
interesting
that's just
too.
me.
This is just, again, this is the point that they used. I didn't,
Yeah,
I don't know if it's a cheat that I didn't watch the movie. I read the book instead and watched, because I just didn't want to experience that same thing again, even though I've seen the
yeah,
movie maybe twice. But yeah, it that could very well be the case. I just like that there is at least three different tones that they tried to strike. So as far as the cinematography goes, there are some beautiful things in here
yeah.
and counterpoints. But yeah, there are some other shots that are just very dull. And again, I don't know if that's the point they were trying to make, but when I watch a lot of 70s movies, I get that same kind of, oh, like that's obviously a 70s technique that they're going to kind
Yeah.
of move
Yeah.
away from in the future.
Yeah. You mentioned a couple other things that I wanted to mention, and that was that fight scene with the other gang after they thwart the raping of that other girl and she
Yeah.
gets away. They had this fight scene, and like you say, it's so over the top. It is comedic, but for me, it bugged me because you kept seeing the same characters being thrown from like a balcony to the floor, and then like having them being
Yeah.
thrown out a window, or like a chair being bashed over their heads, or like these different things. You're like, that guy was just on the balcony last scene, the very last shot. That guy was on the
Yeah.
stage, and now he's over here being thrown out of a window. Do you know what I mean? So you're like, I get it. It's supposed to be funny. It's supposed to be like, ultra violent and all that. But in the book, it's told in a more realistic way. And so after having read the book and then watching that part of the movie, I was like, it didn't work for me. I was like, I wasn't expecting that. Even though I'd seen it before, I was kind of like, I wanted this to be a little more like what it is in the book. And so
Yeah.
I think that also affected my feelings this third time around is I read the book now and I fell in love with the book. But the movie I was kind of like, ah.
I
But
like
still,
too how they made Dim, even though Alex is making fun of him all the time, he was still a strong character.
yeah,
Like
yeah,
they kept saying how strong of a fighter he was, and he was an idiot, but you wanted him in a fight because he was so brutal.
yeah,
And then Dim becomes the cop at the end, and he's still brutal. The way that he double crosses Alex with the cat lady, that kind of thing.
yeah,
In the book, Dim was more of a character, I felt like, than he was in this. And
Yeah.
again, the only other thing I want to say about cinematography too is that there are some shots I really like the shot of, you know, when his Pete and George, is that his name? Who's the other guy that gets
Georgie and Pete. Yeah.
Georgie and Pete, when there's that scene where they're in like the basement or the bottom floor and everything's a mess, and Alex comes down and confronts them. If you look, it's very angled, and the angles point you to where you're supposed to look at. The stairs are angled in a way where supposed to look at a certain character. Alex's walking stick points in the same way as the stairwell. It's very, that shot is so elegantly and perfectly composed. It's how can you not be impressed by something like that? But like when you make the same point again and again and again and again, it's like it's like I said, it's like I get it. Like, why am I still watching this for this?
Yeah. There's a small thing that I noticed from the book to the movie that didn't get included. They included half of it, but not the other half.
Okay.
And when he comes home after that first night of ultraviolence and he's all like, you know, worn out and he is going to go up the stairs, he kicks at the elevator door and it's all broken and he can't use the elevator. So he takes the stairs. In the book, after he's been, you know, whatever you call it, fixed.
Yeah.
And he gets let out of prison early and he comes home to surprise his parents. In the book, the elevator has been fixed. The graffiti has been cleaned up. Everything's nice and pristine now. And so it's kind of like they didn't put that in the book. They just showed him walk in the door and like, oh, hello, whatever. But I was like, why take the time to have him check the elevator and see that it's broken the first time, but not have him walk past or use the now working elevator like it is in the book?
Especially if you get what the book is.
That would have been nice because that's a point there. You're saying
Yeah.
like now he's all better. Everything's all fixed. Everything's all better. And when he comes home to a, you know, a clean apartment building, that makes a difference. But they didn't put that in. I was like, interesting. I would have liked to see that.
When he walks in too, his parents are kind of shocked to see him in the book, and they have the other roommate, the other guy, the lodger, or whatever.
And doesn't he jump up and like try to stop him from coming in like a?
Yeah, it's like, what are you doing in here? Like, you get out, right? And I like that scene in the movie because there's a threat of violence that Alex can't commit to because it sickens him. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But in the book, I love how, like you said, like everything's fixed. I don't recall Alex. Does he notice in the book that everything's fixed as he walk past it?
Yeah, he notices it.
Because he's the narrator. Why wouldn't he, right?
Yeah.
But I like that it hints that everything's fixed, but as soon as he walks in that room, you can tell that it's maybe worse for him. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it is interesting in the movie, and again, maybe this is another reason why I couldn't stomach it, is you watch all these horrible things that Alex is doing. You watch the horrible when you talk about Malcolm McDowell keeping his eyes open, it's excruciating watching that scene where they pry his eyes open, and there was a real life doctor that was dripping water in his eyes to make sure he wasn't getting hurt. Excruciating to watch, and he's like in a straitjacket, he can't move. I'm like, wow, the commitment on McDowell, right? Like, holy crap.
Yeah. The other impressive, sorry.
No, and then the other thing and then at the end when it cuts and he's being brutalized now, it's like I don't know if I get it, but I don't know if I like that because he deserves the stuff that he's getting, right? But it's like we don't want to see it because it's uncomfortable to see him. You know what I mean? It's like it does that flip-flopping thing where, again, I don't like what it's making me feel, but I understand why it's making. It's just like I said, it's more interesting to reflect on it than it is to actually sit there and watch it.
Yeah, well, that was the other physical thing that he was able to accomplish when he's being drowned, and they were hitting him with the batons or whatever, and he like held his breath for like 2.5 minutes, some kind of a crazy amount of time, and I was like, man, I tried to do it and I couldn't do it, but that's pretty impressive that he's able to do those things.
Yeah.
So I think Malcolm McDowell did a good job acting in this movie. However, I didn't picture someone like that when I listened to the book. Like, I had a different image in my head of what Alex looked like. And again, I keep saying this, but I just imagined a Terry Gilliam movie telling the story. And I was like, man, I would love that movie. If it was Terry Gilliam, I would be so much more excited about this movie. But Stanley Kubrick's good, but like he just has this kind of flat, boring style that I can't get into.
Well, you talked about Kubrick. I think it's okay to admit that you don't like a director. I think that there's a stigma attached to people like Kubrick where you have to like him. You know what I mean? It's like, if you're going to consider yourself a movie file, you have to like Stanley Kubrick. And I push against that. I'm like, I don't have to. Don't tell me that, because I'm not going to force myself to like something if I don't like it. You know what I mean? And I agree with you. I think he's made some masterful films, but also some films that I could live without, right? No director is perfect. I'm sorry, right? Even Steven Spielberg is is capable of some real duds, and he's made some
Yeah.
terrible that he's learned from and made better movies since, after
Yeah.
that. But like Kubrick is not untouchable. I don't I push against people saying that Kubrick is one of the greatest directors, because you can think that, but I don't need to think that. I think it's okay to
Yeah.
admit that stuff.
And I'm not going to tell anybody they can't think that. I'm just saying, in preparation for this episode, I went on a Kubrick kind of binge, and I watched Lolita. I watched Doctor Strangelove, 2001: A Space Odyssey. I watched Full Metal Jacket. Anyway, The Shining. I watched that a few times because it was on TV like every night. I was like, oh, it's on again. I'll watch it again.
Fun
And I
times
watched
with The Shining.
that documentary, Room 237, where they talk all about the hidden messages. I watched all those movies. And so I was kind of like, I got to know his style. And I can say that he's got a vision, but I can also say he's very boring.
He's a visionary. There's nothing. My thing with Kubrick is I think he's a very cold, clinical director. It's one of the things that made AI, artificial intelligence, so fascinating for me, because you've got Spielberg, who's the most sentimental and gooeyest of all directors, taking on this subject that's from the guy that's most cold and clinical. So it's fascinating watching these two tones mesh and kind of bump up together. But the thing with Kubrick, the other thing too is like, don't tell me that I have to like Kubrick, but also don't tell other people that they can't. Right, or don't tell other, that kind of thing. There's a push pull to that. But my thing with Kubrick is you look at something like 2001 and A Clockwork Orange, they're divisive films. The point is to stir you up and make you, I don't know, angry or confused. Like his thing is, it's not so much what you glean from the story as the experience of watching it. That's what you pull away from it, the feelings that you get.
Yeah.
So if somebody doesn't like 2001, don't tell them they're an idiot for not liking 2001. The whole point of 2001 and A Clockwork Orange is to be divisive. You're not going to have the same person watch A Clockwork Orange as another person and think, oh, this is a fun movie that's teaching me about free will and all that stuff. Another person like me is going to go, well, it teaches you about free will, but why in this way? Why do I have to subject myself to all these awful, horrible images to get that point when you can tell literally any other story and I'll still get that, right? Don't tell people that they're wrong for disliking a movie. Especially Kubrick is divisive. I think the most friendly movie, crowd friendly, audience friendly movie he's ever made is Doctor Strangelove. That's the most purely pleasurable movie that he's made. That's not going to make you angry. There's so many funny things, and the Sellers performance is so great as all 4-5 characters that he plays. The dozens of characters that he plays that are so fun. I think Strangelove is the only movie that you can just put on and have it just be a fun time, right?
Yeah.
But Kubrick is purposely a divisive director. You're going to have different feelings when you watch a Kubrick movie.
Well, here's
don't get mad at me. Don't get mad at you for not liking Kubrick. You know what I mean? There's nothing wrong with that.
Here's what I'll say also is that I mention this a lot on our channel, is that I want a movie to let me feel something or give me an experience. And A Clockwork Orange does that. It gives you an experience. I mean, it gave you an experience. You hated this movie. And so it does that. And so in that regard, it's successful. And I appreciate that because I want that from a movie. I want to feel something. I want to go on a journey and have a good time or experience, and Kubrick movies, they do that for you. So if you want that experience, you're probably going to have an experience one way or another, whether you like it or not. You're going to have an experience.
Yeah. Like I said, this is a movie that's a ton of fun to talk. I've had a ton of fun chatting about this with you, right? There are themes there that you can talk about forever. The free will theme is fascinating to me, right? Like the fact that in the movie, everything is cyclical. Like Alex does all these things. He gets put through this. He watches atrocities or whatever. He becomes kind of desensitized to it, grossed out by these things. He gets brutalized in the same way that he brutalized people. And then at the end, he just becomes his same awful self again. It's all cyclical, right? I like all that. I get it. I just don't want to sit through a movie like that. You know what I mean?
I have to mention this because I'm going to go crazy if I don't. I hate the end when he's being fed by the politician or the what's his name, Minister of the Interior or whatever.
Inferior.
And he's like, I hate watching that. But then the last time I watched it, I was laughing at it.
Yeah,
I was like, that's kind of funny, but I still hate watching him do that.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it strikes a comedic note at the wrong time, and maybe a Gilliam would be able to pull that off better.
Yeah,
because he handles that kind of crazy extreme stuff a lot easier than a lot of directors do. But this is a movie I can't say that I like it.
I can't say that I like A Clockwork Orange, but I love what it's trying to say, and in some ways how it says it. So
Yeah.
I'm just looking forward to never having to think about this movie again.
Okay.
So
Well, we don't have to. I think we're done.
yeah.
So I guess that's A Clockwork Orange.
Well, what about you? I mean, is there anything else you want to mention about the movie before we leave it behind?
Actually, yes. When we were watching it, my wife had the question, is this movie really a dystopian? Because I know when people describe this movie, they describe it as a dystopian. Um, and in her definition of that term, it's basically like when civilization is wiped out, a catastrophic event happens, something takes place to make people have to rebuild society. And you don't see that in this movie per se. But I looked at what the actual definition of dystopian is, and that is if a futuristic time where the government is either corrupt or ineffectual. And if you go by that definition, then this movie is a dystopian.
Okay. Well, they don't talk about anything. There's no
Yeah.
world war. There's nothing that leads. It's you have to read something, it feels like, to understand that it takes place in the future. Like it doesn't. It just seems
Yeah.
like the youth or whatever. It just seems very modern. So it
Yeah. I mean,
doesn't.
they wear kind of goofy clothes, but that's not,
Yeah.
it
And
doesn't mean it's dystopian.
I
But what I
guess
will say
no. Go ahead.
is
Go ahead.
the clothes, that always kind of bugged me. In the book, he describes him as being like dressed to the height of fashion. And
Yeah.
then you don't really see that in the book. There's that one scene in the record store when
Yeah.
he's actually dressed up kind of nice. That's the only time you see him dressed up in a way that I would actually call the height of fashion.
Yeah.
When they're wearing those white outfits with the jock straps, whatever they're wearing, it's just kind of like, that's not fashionable. It just seems weird to me.
Yeah. So I guess the only thing I want to say about the future is the way that they have all the light bulbs like unsheathed or uncovered, and it's just really, really bright, like hanging from things or in backgrounds. That could be future. Like if you think about the future, think if we thought there were going to be hoverboards by now, right? We thought there were going to be flying cars, and there's just little subtle differences between now and 20 years ago. So I guess that could count as kind of, because that style is interesting, like just bright lamps and that's it, bright bulbs. So that
Yeah.
could be kind of a futuristic thing. But again, it's interesting that they don't really comment on it, that it takes place at a future time.
Well, do we want to talk about a movie that from Kubrick that you
Oh,
do like?
well, let me say this. Yes,
Yeah.
I will say this. I have like a list of his probably his best movie.
Okay.
Then what I think is his best movie, and then the most boring movie, and then well, you mentioned Doctor Strangelove. That's obviously the funniest one.
Yeah.
But I think Barry Lyndon is like super boring. You can't get it is so boring. Like I hated that one.
Yeah.
Hated it. I will never watch that one again. It's so boring.
Right.
There's no need for that movie to even exist. I think he was bored making it. But Doctor Strangelove definitely funny. But my favorite Kubrick movie, now we mentioned this before, I think, that's A Full Metal Jacket.
Okay.
Like I can watch that first half of the movie and just laugh my butt off and just have so much fun watching that boot camp scene and Matthew Modine and the whole just Arlie Ermy, I think that's his name, right?
Yep. Uh-huh.
It's so funny. And I know we talked about this in our Ghost episode because the guest we had on, he loves that movie. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna go ahead and watch the second half this time because usually I don't. Usually I'll skip past the second half because, like you said, I know war is bad. I know Vietnam was stupid, but I watched it and I was like, okay, I got into a little more and I appreciated a whole lot more than I had in the past. But my favorite Kubrick movie, Full Metal Jacket, hands
Okay.
down.
So yeah, my favorite science fiction movie and my favorite Kubrick is 2001. I just think that, again, when I saw it, I get it. I get people are gonna be bored by it, but like I don't know, it just struck me when I watched it that first time in the 90s, where I love the idea that it's about man discovering new technologies, and the way that they use the technology is they use it for violence, right? That's just the natural inclination of man, right? And at the end, I think it's interesting that at the end, like the Star Child, it's like an awakening. And it's the same thing with A Clockwork Orange. It ends with a shot that's like an awakening where Alex goes back to his usual self, right? But I just love the special effects that they use, the trumbull effects. I love like I said, the Unsworth cinematography. It's just it suits what a science fiction movie is to me, which is different from Star Wars, which is more fantasy or space opera is what it is. A science fiction movie is there to make you question things. right? Again, 2001 shows a machine becoming more human, and then A Clockwork Orange shows a human becoming more of a machine. I like the dichotomy there.
Yeah.
I like that 2001 is my favorite Kubrick movie, but Clockwork Orange is my least favorite, and he made them back to back, and they kind of say the same thing a lot of the time. But yeah, I get that 2001's like watching paint dry, but I'm just fascinated by the techniques in it. And then I don't know. I want to talk about just mention The Shining really quick. It's not a
Sure.
terrible movie, but The Shining is well regarded as the scariest movie ever made. And I just got to say that the movie doesn't scare me in the slightest. I am
Yeah.
never unnerved. I'm never in distressed. I'm never in a state of suspense with The Shining. It just doesn't scare me at all. I think Nicholson goes over the top so fast that there's no arc there. And so I'm kind of watching it for a remove. But you mentioned the documentary Room 237. What I love about that documentary is there's so many interpretations of The Shining. I love
Yeah.
that you can look at it as an Indian screed or like a screed against the Apollo moon landings, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
All these, as crazy as those theories are, I love that you can watch The Shining and pull those. I love that you can parse so many things from The Shining. That's what I love about that movie, even though I don't think it's scary in the slightest.
Yeah. I would agree with you on that. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's by far not his worst. And like you said, Doctor Strangelove is one of the funniest movies I've ever
But
seen.
I'll say this: after watching Room 237 and then watching The Shining is so much more fascinating to watch.
Yeah,
After you've
exactly.
seen all that stuff, and you know
You
all that
appreciate
stuff's
it
there.
more. Right.
It makes so much more of a fun experience.
But again, that's the point. I'm going to say this again about Kubrick. I love that he worked, we mentioned before, he worked on The Spy Who Loved Me, right? He showed up and actually consulted on The Spy Who Loved Me to show how to teach people how to shoot that submarine set.
Oh yeah.
Modern romance, I think, with Albert Brooks he called it a perfect movie. And so it's funny watching a Kubrick movie like 2001 or Clockwork Orange, then finding out that he loves an Albert Brooks movie. It's like, oh, you just became really human. It's like finding out that Christopher Nolan loves, Michael Bay movies, right? It's or Talladega Nights. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
you're human, and I can really empathize, even though your movies are kind of cold and maybe a little too pompous. So I don't know. Kubrick is meant to be divisive, and like with all his movies, except for Doctor Strangelove, do that. Like you said, he makes you feel something, even though he can be stodgy and dry. I still think that at least you're going to have an experience watching.
Right. Well, thanks for doing that, Darin. I know that was hard for you.
That was rough.
So I got one question for you then.
Okay.
The next episode, what's it going to be then, eh?
Okay. Well, we're lightening up a lot. Okay. I know that we've had the lady Juan on, and so I've been chatting with her partner Chris Scalzo for a while, and he's mentioned on their podcast before, Screen Run, that Superman is one of his comfort movies. And so Superman is one of my comfort movies. And so I thought, well, there's no better movie to follow up to Clockwork Orange than Superman. Let's go from something that's really dour and kind of, I don't know, evil, but to a point. Let's just talk about something that's good-natured fun. Let's cover the Richard Donner Superman from 1978.
All right, that sounds good. Okay, then for NostalgiaCast, I'm Johnny Craddock.
And I'm Darin Lundberg.
And I'll say it again. What's it going to be then, eh?
My apologies for this episode.
Oh, I was going to say that's my favorite thing. Happy polylogies.